Hey guys, in today's video we're going to learn how to make this football shirt. Now this is a carved cake. I made it using a 10-inch square tin. And the cake needs to be around about, I would say, 2 inches thick. So once you've taken the top off your cake, we're then going to trim around to make the basic shape of a football shirt. So you're going to take off an inch about either side and then probably go up maybe about 6 inches. So just until you kind of see the spaces where the shirt sleeves are going to be. Pop the cake to one side that you chop off because we will be using some of it later. And we're just going to take the corners off the top to create our sleeves. So you can see now that I've got my rough shape, I'm just going to start carving down because we want this football shirt to have a little bit of movement to it. I see quite a lot of shirt cakes where they're quite square and rigid, and I wanted to create something that had a little bit of movement there. And so we're going to round off the edges all the way around. Now we want the shirt to be longer than it is wide, so we're going to add a base, an extra bit at the bottom as well. Just be careful that you don't take off too much. I'm just using a bread knife and I'm just taking off small pieces. Where the sleeves join on, we're just going to take a little bit out of there so that the sleeve area kind of slopes down a little bit, as it would do on the back where it becomes quite rounded. Tapering it down towards the neck. And then we're just going to take another little bit of cake, and this is going to create the collar for the shirt. So it needs to be a lot lower than the actual shirt itself. I'm pushing it up the board. This is a 14-inch square board, by the way, that I've got. We're just going to add that bit on the bottom there. Don't worry about the little gap in between because that can easily be filled in with buttercream or ganache. So once you're happy with the general shape that you've got, we're then going to go ahead and fill the sponge. So I've cut the sponge in half, and this is a normal Victoria sponge. And so I'm just going to fill this with jam and buttercream. A really thin layer of jam, making sure that you don't go too close to the edges with the jam. And then just a good dollop of buttercream and just spreading that around. Trying not to get too close to the edges because when you put the top on and you press it down slightly, that will actually cause some of the buttercream to come out. And you want to try and avoid that if possible because we're going to ganache the outside. So once we've done that, we're going to start fitting it all back together, taking any excess that's come off the cake. And then we're going to cover the whole thing in some ganache. I'm using white chocolate ganache that I've mixed at a ratio of 4:1. So for every 400 grams of white chocolate, there is 100 grams of double cream in there. Now you can see that the consistency of the ganache that I've got is quite runny. It's basically, I prefer it like that when I'm putting my crumb coat on, so that it doesn't drag the cake. And you're just going to use one of these flexi smoothers, and this is going to help you spread the ganache across the cake, but it's also going to help with keeping that bend that we've got around the edges that makes it look a little bit rounded. So you can freeze the cake, you could put it in the fridge if you wanted the cake to be a little bit firmer. I've done this, the cake's just been at room temperature in the morning. But I do prefer to put the crumb coat on when the cake is at room temperature just because the ganache doesn't set as quickly. But it is easier to do it when it's a little bit cold because then you don't have to deal with a lot of the edges, the bits breaking off and stuff with it being quite a soft cake. Could do this on a smaller scale if you wanted to. Maybe trying a 9-inch tin. I thought this was quite a nice size. Obviously this cake is a Newcastle shirt cake. You could change it into any other football team just by changing the colour of the shirt. So once you've got your crumb coat on, you then want to put it in the fridge for a couple of minutes, maybe like 5 or 10 minutes, just so that that layer can firm up a little bit. And then you're going to add your final layer on top, which is going to allow you to smooth everything over. So you can see now that it's been in the fridge for about 5 or 10 minutes, and it's just the cake itself is just a lot firmer. If you would like to see any specific tutorials, if you pop a comment down below, I'm always happy to take requests for tutorials. I have a Facebook group which is Cake Nation Academy, which we share tips. You can ask me questions, you can make requests for tutorials. All of the videos that I've got are all posted in there as well. It's just a really fun group for you guys to share your work and chat to other bakers as well. So when you're using your flexi smoother, you want to make sure that you're bending it slightly so that it's not flat, it's quite rounded, and that's just going to help you go across the curves that you've actually got set there. Be careful that you when you're filling in the collar, you've got that step there. It wants to be a lot lower than the cake itself. So next I've just got some white fondant, and I'm just going to pop some on to the ganache, and this is going to help give the illusion of movement. So you're going to try to place it in places where you would have a natural fold in the football shirt. So usually around the shoulders, underneath the arms, around the waist area. That's usually where you get these folds. They need to be quite thin, pointy at either end, and you need to kind of smooth them to the cake. So although we're trying to create movement, you don't want to see underneath the fondant the sort of ridge where it's joined onto the ganache. That kind of wants to be as smooth as what you can. There's no real way of telling how it's going to look until you put the fondant on top. So try to smooth it out as much as you can. But when you're smoothing, try not to flatten it out. You're wanting to smooth the join between the ganache and the fondant. You're not going to want to take away the raised area of it, if that makes sense. Try not to put too many going through the middle, because you're going to stick a name and a number on the back of the shirt, and obviously the more that you've got there, the harder it is to do. So I've got some white fondant, and I've rolled that out quite thin, and I'm just going to pop that on top, and then just use my fingers, and I've got a leafing tool, I think that's what it's called, that I'll go in for some of the finer areas. So you're securing your edges, and then you're going over the areas where you've got the fondant. At this point it should be quite soft, so you can still change the shape of the fondant underneath. It's always best to do this all in one go, so that you literally have that time to play about with it and move it. So taking off any excess, and then like I said, just going in with your fingers, trying not to stab the fondant. And there you can see I've just got my leafing tool, and I'm just going around the pieces of fondant that were underneath, just to create a little bit more definition. If you make a mistake at this point, you can rub it out with your fingers. So don't worry if you make a mark that shouldn't be there. The fondant is still pliable, and you can rub that out. You don't have to worry about it being super smooth. You can see that I've just rubbed out that bit there. Where the joins are, if you've not made it pointy enough, you can point it with your fingers. And you can see there, like I've done with that one, and just smoothing over the area that you've done, just to take the finger marks out of it as well. And you're just going to do this throughout the rest of the cake, so just working your way through, smoothing over any areas. This shirt has got some black on it, so we're going to decorate that as well over the top. So you kind of want it to be as neat as possible at this point, because if there's any lumps or bumps that shouldn't be there, that's just going to show up more once the black fondant goes on top. So that's what the bottom looks like. We're going to airbrush this later on as well, so you'll be able to see, you know, where we use the airbrush and why we use the airbrush in those areas as well. So I'm just marking with a knife where the black line is at the top of the shirt, and I've just got some black fondant. I've neatened the edge of one side, and that's going to be the straight bit that I've put on. And then you're just going to push that on top of the white fondant and trimming off any excess. If you do make a mistake, you can chop the excess off. So if the line's not too straight, you have to remember that with the shirt there's a bit of movement, so the lines won't be dead straight either. So this football shirt's got black sleeves, so I'm just adding on some black. Now this fondant's rolled quite thin so that when you put the name on the back, there's not too much of a gap between the white and the black, and it all kind of looks like it's one shirt or it's one piece of fabric, just like the real shirt would do. So you can see I'm just neatening off the line there, and then just trimming off the excess, taking off the little bit of black colouring that was there, and then just chopping off the top there. And then we're going to do a black strip for the middle of the shirt. So again, just a thin piece of black fondant, rolled quite thin. We're going to straighten it out here. So I've done this of a width of one of the giant squares. So I think that makes it about 2 inches thick. And you're going to run that from the bottom of the shirt right to the top, right through the middle. Again, trimming off the excess at the join, and then just smoothing over, following the guidelines that's been set by the shirt so far. It didn't take very long to do this cake, maybe an hour to put it all together, and that's from ganaching and everything like that. It's quite a simple effect that doesn't really take too much time. So we've got some black strips to go down either side of the shirt as well. So just using exactly the same method as before, we're just going to pop that on, just working the fondant over the areas where the movement is, and just chopping off around the sleeve that's already there. If there's a gap, you can just push the areas together. The fondant's still quite soft, so it allows for a little bit of movement. And then we're just going to do the same thing to the other side, just to cover the sleeve and then the strip down the side of the cake as well. And chopping off any excess. Now, if you wanted, you could have covered the board first and done this work. I prefer to do this first and then cover with fondant, just because I'm worried about marking the board or getting any fondant stuck on the board or anything like that. So I just find it easier to cover it all afterwards. The airbrush colours that I've used today are Chroma Colours Green, and then I've used Spectrum Flow Black. So I will put a link to everything that I've used in the description box below. Right now I've just got the Sugar Flare white powder. I'm going to paint the line around the back of the collar, and then we're just going to paint on the Newcastle FC on the back of the shirt. So next it's covering the board. So I've just got some green fondant. I've taken two colours of green and mixed them together so they've got sort of like a little bit of different colours in there. And then how I've made the grass effect is I've covered with fondant and then I've just used my fingers just to imprint all across the fondant, just to give it a little bit of movement, a little bit of texture. And when we airbrush those, it's going to pick up quite well the sort of like the different areas of the texture that we've created. And you're going to do this all the way around the board. And then I've just printed off some edible images for the name and the number. I was going to use cutters for this, but the cutters that I had were either too small or too big. I've purposely left a white line around the number and name because that's how it is on the shirt. So if you was to print off any edible lettering or numbers, I would check how it is on the shirt that you're trying to replicate. We're just going to stick this down with a little bit of water, trying to make sure that you've got underneath the edges. You really want it all to stick down. You don't want any corners to be sort of like sticking up. So once those are all in place, we're going to start off with the black airbrush. When we're using the black airbrush, you want to highlight the movement that you've got in the shirt. So either side of each of your ridges, you want to colour with the black. Always test it on a piece of paper first. You want it to be a fairly light spray because we don't want straight black lines that just run down. We want it to be quite soft and shaded like it naturally would do. So you can see that I'm just going over very, very slightly and it's just picking up those lines that we've got there and just highlighting those. If this was a different coloured shirt, you might have to do more of the black than I've done, but there's only a little bit of white showing on this cake, so I didn't need to do too much. If it would have been a red shirt, I would have gone over the arms and everything like that. Once you're happy with the black that you've got on there, so you can see I'm just going over different areas, but once you're happy with the black, you're just going to add some green to the black that's already in there, and then we're just going to go on and spray the board. The covering doesn't have to be the same all the way around because it's a grass texture. If you didn't want to use fondant, you could use coloured coconut, which would give a grass effect as well. You could pipe the grass effect with buttercream, and then you could airbrush that afterwards. That would give a really nice effect too. It's just dependent on what you want to do to replicate the grass. So just going back over with a little bit more black in this time, just picking out certain areas to make that a little bit darker. And then this would just need to dry for a couple of hours just to make sure that the board's dry. So here was the finished cake. I hope you liked today's tutorial. If you have, please give a big thumbs up down below. Don't forget to comment and don't forget to subscribe. If you'd like to see more of my tutorials, please click the links on the screen now. Thanks for watching.